More and more, it's becoming the dream of people to escape the cubicle and live the life they want. Now, there's nothing wrong with the traditional career path to retirement, but I want to show that there are other options that are possible. Paula Pant from Afford Anything did just this, so today we'll walk through how she was able to quit her job and travel the world. Then when she came back, she decided that the regular 9 to 5 wasn't going to work for her and created the lifestyle she wanted. Welcome to the MapleMoney Show, the podcast that helps Canadians improve their personal finances to create lasting financial freedom. You've heard me talk a lot about Wealthsimple, but the biggest myth about robo-advisors is that it's all tech and you're on your own. Are you curious about moving over but have some questions? You can now book a 15-minute call with an experienced Wealthsimple portfolio manager. Simply head over to maplemoney.com/wealthsimplechat and book your call today. That's maplemoney.com/wealthsimplechat. Now here's Paula. Hi, Paula. Welcome to the Maple Money Show.
Hi, thank you. It's great to be here.
So I've followed your story probably from the beginning because I think when you first started blogging, I didn't realize you had just started blogging back when we first met. So I think I've seen it right from the beginning. But going way back to then, you had an interesting story because you sort of ditched your job and decided to go on to travel and sort of live the life you want. Can you go right back to the beginning there and just talk about what it was like working your 9 to 5?
Absolutely. So when I graduated from college, I graduated from college in 2005, and I started interning at a local newspaper. I interned there for about 6 months after graduation, and eventually the editor offered me a full-time job. I was thrilled because I really wanted to be a newspaper reporter. Those positions were very, very hard to come by, especially I was not a journalism major, so I already had a disadvantage going into it, not having the quote-unquote appropriate degree for that occupation. And so end of 2005, beginning of 2006, when I got offered a full-time position as a newspaper reporter, I mean, I had my dream job. And if things had been a little bit different, maybe I would have stayed there forever and I'd still be there today. But there were a couple of issues with it. One was that my starting salary was $21,000. And remember, we're talking 2005, 2006 dollars, right? This is not like 1970s dollars here. And the other major problem was that I got exactly 2 weeks of vacation per year, 10 business days of vacation per year. That includes Christmas and the holiday season, by the way. That had to come out of that 10 days. And so what that meant is that realistically, I would never be able to travel. And particularly, I really wanted to travel overseas. I was so aware that there were all of these places in the world that I'd never seen. At that point in my life, I had never gone to Southeast Asia. I'd never seen Thailand or Laos or Cambodia or Malaysia or Singapore or Indonesia or the Philippines, right? I'd been a little bit to Western Europe, but I'd never been to Eastern Europe or any of the former Soviet nations. I'd never been to Africa. I'd never even really been to South America. And there was no way that I was going to be able to quite literally cover the map with 2 weeks of vacation a year. You know, really 1 week. 1 week is Christmas, and then 1 week is a trip to Croatia? I mean, like that, it's just not going to happen. And so I realized I had a choice. Like, I could either keep working a 9 to 5 job, which I really enjoyed. I love the job itself, or I could travel, but I couldn't do both. Mm-hmm. And so for the 3 years that I worked at that newspaper, I freelanced during the evenings and weekends, and I saved all of that freelance income. I made a starting salary of $21,000. By the time I quit, my ending salary was $31,000. So that was the most that I was actually making for my employer. But I was freelancing and I was saving all of that freelance money. And by the end of those 3 years, in 2008, I'd saved up $25,000, which was, if you think about it, that was about a year's salary for me.
Yeah.
And so with that in the bank, I quit my job. I bought a one-way plane ticket to Cairo, Egypt. And for the next 2 years, I lived out of a backpack and just traveled around the globe and backpacked around, and I freelanced a little bit. And that was really how I learned the power of freelancing, the power of being self-employed, the power of really choosing your own like destiny and not accepting the confines that an employer hands to you.
So you really liked your job, which which is a little different when I hear these kind of stories. Often there's a lot of people that are kind of stuck in jobs they don't like. How much worse does that make it for them?
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine being in a job that I dislike. I
Hmm.
mean, I guess I had some like, part-time jobs in high school that I disliked, but to actually be in a job that you dislike as a profession, 40 hours a week as an adult, that just sounds awful. In my
Yes.
story, I really did love the newspaper, right? I loved the work itself. I loved the people that I worked with. My editor was very much a mentor. So I enjoyed coming to the newsroom. One of the things that I missed the most was I missed the social aspect of being in the newsroom, surrounded by the other reporters and the other editors. I really missed that. I still do miss that, even to this day. Um, and uh, you know, still to this day, that editor, my boss, like, um, we don't talk often, but I still very much consider him a mentor and a big influence on my writing career. If I were to ever
Mhm.
publish a book, I would absolutely thank him in the acknowledgments. So, yeah, I mean, I think that type of, if you don't, for people who are listening to this, if you don't have that type of feeling about your job, wow, then I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it's something where I think people get trapped. Like they've chosen their career, they're making their income, and they don't feel like they have somewhere to go. But you've shown for really much less of a reason. Like it's great to travel, but there's a lot of people that should be considering other options for much worse reasons. That Yeah, it's something to look at. Not
Yeah.
necessarily that you have to continue doing what you've always been doing, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, if two things had been different, like if I had been at exactly that same job, but if I had 6 weeks of vacation a year and I was making 70,000 a year instead of 30,000, right? If those two things had been different, I would have stayed because I,
Mhm.
I loved the job itself. But I was making 30 grand a year at my peak,
Yeah.
and that was after a promotion. After they promoted me to assistant news editor, that was when I got the 30,000 a year, the raise to making a salary of $31,000 a year. That was in 2008, my 2008 income.
So
And yeah, I knew I couldn't live like that forever. It was unsustainable.
for sure. Um, so you decide you need to make this change. What was the first steps? I assume if you were like me, you kind of had to get your money under control.
Well, a large piece of that was built around freelancing. While I worked at that newspaper, I lived on my my salary, my normal day job salary. I put 15% of it into the company 401k, and the rest of it I lived on. And then everything that I saved in order to quit my job came from freelancing. So it was that side hustle, if you will, that allowed me to save up the money that allowed me to quit my job.
Okay. And I'm a huge fan of side hustles, obviously, but we've talked about it a few times on the show too, where I think it's almost a need nowadays, whether you're quitting your job or not, just to bridge that gap. If you're a single person with just one income, or even if you're married and just one income, it seems like you do have to do something else, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, you know how in investing they say to always diversify, never put all of your eggs in one basket. If all of your income is coming from a single employer, then you have no income diversification. You're putting all of your income eggs into a single basket. And so you need to hedge against the possibility that you might get laid off or the company might collapse, something might happen. And if something happens, then if that single employer constitutes 100% of your income, going from 100% to 0% is, you know, that's rough. That's a rough fall. So if even it doesn't have to, freelancing or a side hustle or some side business doesn't have to be a major piece of what you do.
Mhm.
But if you could even get it to the point where 80% of your income comes from your day job and 20% comes from some type of a side hustle, and then you save and invest that entire 20%, I mean, over time, that will create some significant padding such that uh, when the unpredictable events of life happen, and it might be that you get laid off, it might be that your spouse suddenly leaves you, it might be that you get a very, very unfortunate medical diagnosis. I mean, you never know what life has in store. And so to have those savings in place, it won't solve all your problems, but it'll at least soften the financial component of those problems.
Yes. I've had many readers and listeners kind of give me this exact question was sort of, oh, I'd love to be saving, but, and then it's normally they're living paycheck to paycheck, and with lower incomes or bad spending habits, it can happen. And um, yeah, eventually you can only do so much on the frugality side, right? Like you can only cut your expenses so much, and then at some point you have to increase your income.
Absolutely. One of my favorite expressions is that you can't shrink your way to greatness. So frugality for a lot of people, if you're brand new to this and you've never really thought that much about your money before, I think frugality for a lot of people is attractive because it's the low-hanging fruit. It's this thing that you can do. Ironically, it provides immediate gratification, right? Because it's something that you can do right now, immediately, that produces instant effects or instant results.
Yeah.
So if you encounter this notion of money management or frugality for the first time in your life, and all of a sudden you take a look around and you realize that you have subscriptions to HBO Now and Hulu Plus and YouTube Red and Netflix and and you realize you've got and Spotify Premium. I'm just like thinking of everything I can name, right? And you've never taken the time to add it up, but you realize all of these subscriptions combined come to $100 a month. Well, guess what? Keep one of them, just one, cut all of the rest. And now, let's say the one that you keep costs $10 a month. You've now saved $90 a month,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think frugality is attractive because it's something where you don't have a fear of failure. You don't have a fear of rejection. You don't have the uncertainty of, I don't know how to start a business or I don't know how to invest in index funds or in rental properties, right? You don't have any of those fears. So it feels accessible. It feels immediate. There's that instant result. And for that reason, I think that frugality is very attractive. And it's not that I'm anti-frugality per se, although sometimes I joke that I am, but it's that there's only so much of that you can do. And at a certain point, it becomes inefficient to try to keep tweaking at the margins
Yeah.
when you could instead be focusing on bigger wins. So an example of this is I spent 3 years working on this online course, and there were many points during that time when I could have been working on it. I could have been working on this thing that I would eventually go on to release and enroll students in it for for an enrollment fee, and it would become part of my income, my earnings, right? Like I could have maybe I could have done it in 2 years instead of in 3, right? But instead of, there's so many hours where instead of working on it, I was like tweaking my subscribe and save in Amazon so that I could like optimize it for the 15% savings rather than the 5% savings. Like I would spend hours doing that. I would spend hours, like like uh like driving to Costco because I could get toilet paper in bulk cheaper than I could at the normal grocery store. And if I were to truly be honest with myself, let's say I spent an extra 3 hours a week doing that type of stuff, right? 3 hours a week over the course of a year, that's more than 150 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had just taken those same 150 hours and put it towards building out this course or building out something else, creating a an ebook that I might sell on Amazon, or creating, or heck, even just offering one-on-one coaching for 3 hours a week, right? Any of those things would have yielded far greater financial returns.
Yeah, I think even someone that's still in a career, they can look at this even based on their current sort of hourly rate. There's value to their time, and if they're sort of wasting their time on small little things that don't actually return anything that they'll
Right.
notice, then yeah, like you basically said, it's basically like a few weeks income
Yeah.
lost time wise, lost in a year, and that's just terrible.
Exactly, exactly. And, so I struggled with this for a long time because the rational part of my brain would then argue, like, yeah, but would you actually spend those 3 hours a week working, or would you spend it like watching Game of Thrones fan theories, right? Um,
Are you staring at my computer right now? Yeah, it's I do have this problem.
somebody will die.
You really nailed it. Even now that I have this business with the website and everything, where it's like, yes, I'm being more efficient with my time. I'm doing something better than just watching Game of Thrones. It's still very easy to get distracted by these little things that don't matter, and not always focus on the bigger things that would actually help our lives better.
So one of the best frameworks that I found for dealing with this, because for so long I kept that idea of like, but I'm so inefficient with my time.
Mhm.
But if I were only more efficient, if I were only more productive, then I could do it all. Then I could tweak my Amazon subscribe and save, and also, you know, double the revenue in my business, right? And the best framework that I found for kind of answering this question came from an author by the name of Laura Vanderkam. And what she suggested, she said, first, fill your schedule with all of the things that you cannot outsource. And that doesn't necessarily just include work related tasks, that also includes calling your mom, um, you know, exercise, sleep, yoga or stretching, prayer, right? Like you cannot pay somebody to do those things on your behalf. You can't pay somebody to like call your mom on your behalf and inform her that you're doing fine, right? Your mom would be very mad if you did. Um, and so her suggestion was first fill your schedule with all the things that you cannot outsource. And if upon doing that, you still have additional time left over to start infilling things that are outsourceable or delegatable, then do so.
Mhm.
But don't ever place something that's, outsourceable or delegatable above the things that only you can do, regardless of whether or not those things are income producing,
Yeah.
right? So like exercise, sleep, you can't pay somebody to do that for you. So it has to take priority in your life.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned on this show actually where I don't always prioritize sleep. There's so much to get done that I don't schedule it the way I probably should. So I want to jump ahead here a bit. So you kind of found your way to escape your job and travel. What I'm wondering is how you were able to do it with 25,000 in the bank. Were you still freelancing while traveling?
Mhm. I was a little bit, but the biggest, most important thing that I did was I went to countries where the U.S. dollar stretched a lot further. So it's called geographic arbitrage when you earn money in one currency and spend it in a different currency.
Mhm.
And so a big, big piece of how I was able to make that work was that I earned money in US dollars and then spent it in um, Laotian kip or Cambodian baht or Indian rupees, where it's very reasonable to live on $800 a month, you know. Uh, the other thing is that because I was traveling for so long, I wasn't moving around a lot. If you think of the costs of travel, the actual transit itself, the airline tickets, the train tickets, the buses, those are extremely expensive.
Mhm.
But once you get to a city, um, the cost of renting a little guest house and eating local foods that you get from the local market, it's really not that much. Again, particularly in places like Laos or Cambodia or Malaysia, where, well, it depends on, I mean, there are expensive parts of Kuala Lumpur, but you know what I mean? Like there are many, many places outside of the US um, where you can just, where your dollar stretches far. And particularly if you're not moving around very much, then you are really kind of living like a local. So that's the other
Mhm.
piece that I would say is living like a local, like eating local foods. I wasn't trying to buy cheese and alcohol when I was in countries where those weren't really a big part of the culture. Because yeah, you could go to some foreign grocer to get it, but you'd pay a pretty hefty markup, right? So by just eating what was uh, by adapting myself to the surroundings, that helped a lot in terms of cost savings.
Yeah, it makes sense. When I go on vacations, it's far from cheap because it's yeah, there's the airfare and hotels as opposed to being able to rent an apartment and
Yeah.
going out to restaurants instead of groceries. So my vacations look very different, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for those 2 years that I was traveling, I ate vegetarian food and I almost never drank alcohol. I
Mhm.
think I probably during that 2 year period probably had drank, I mean, like maybe on my birthday, maybe like, I don't know, maybe like once every 2 months at the most, a couple of beers.
Yeah.
Um, but uh, but yeah, I mean that those were all of the ways because I was watching my budget pretty closely, and those were all of the ways in which I just didn't just doesn't cost that much to live
Yeah,
if you're
exactly.
not doing the fancy stuff.
So after you traveled all over the place for a couple of years and then you came back, um, I believe you kind of came to a decision, right? You had to decide if you were going back to work or looking to do something else.
Yeah, I did. Well, I don't even know if I could really truly call it a decision because the idea once you've been out of the workforce for 2 years, the idea of sending out your resume to a bunch of like nameless employers who like who might give you a job offer for 45,000 a year if you're lucky, and then you would wake up in the like when your alarm goes off and it's still dark outside and it's cold,
Yeah.
you know then you would have to do that and like scrape ice off your car and then like drive in bumper to bumper traffic. Like that just sounded terrible. So I don't know if I would really call it a decision. I would call it a just didn't want to do that.
Yeah, yeah. You had moved on from that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I briefly um when I came back, I started freelancing right away. I briefly worked at a company that my dad owned.
Yeah.
I worked there for about 6 months. He started me at 45,000, and then very quickly, within about a month or two, we realized he didn't have any money to pay me, and so then he paid me $1 per month, and so I worked for free. So I was employed, but I was employed for free, or technically for $1 per month, while I was just helping out the family business.
Yeah.
And then and then the rest of my time I was freelancing. And in terms of freelancing, it started very, very slowly. I started off, um, so I started off writing these articles for ehow.com, which, which was a website that, let's just say, operated on volume rather than quantity over quality.
Yeah.
And so they paid $15 per article. And so theoretically, my goal was to try to write 3 articles an hour, which would have put my pay rate at 45 an hour, which would have been great.
Hmm.
Realistically, I was able to write about 2 articles an hour for them. So I was making around $30 an hour. The articles were terrible. I wrote under a pseudonym because I didn't want my name to be associated with with those articles because they really were not my best work. Um, so yeah, so that was like how I kind of paid the rent and got some Costco groceries for a while when I first came back. And then eventually I got a position with about.com, They're now, these days, they're referred to as the Balance. But at the time, they were called About.com, and they were owned by the New York Times. So there was like that instant credential, like the prestige of working for this website that was owned by the New York Times,
Yeah.
right? So they hired me on as their budgeting and personal finance expert. And that was what I would call like, quote unquote, my big break. Because once I had that credential, from that point forward, it became relatively a lot easier to then go to AOL Daily Finance or, you know, or like various certified financial planners or registered investment advisors who had websites who needed blogs or content written on their company website. Like it just became a lot easier to go both to media outlets as well as to companies, like financial services companies that needed content on their site, and come to them and say, hey, look at me, I'm the About.com guide to budgeting.
Yeah.
And then, credibility builds on itself. Once the first person kind of gives you that inroad, then you use that to get the second job, to get the third job, and you use that to get the fourth, and so on and so forth. And pretty soon, any niche that you write in is going to be pretty small. And inside of niches, people often know people,
Yeah.
right? And even if you don't know somebody directly, you know of them, you know their reputation, you know somebody who they've worked with. So the more that you stay inside of a niche, the more that your reputation within that niche grows. That's why they say like the riches are in the niches.
Well, yeah, there's a momentum to it that you can't really get in a career, right? Like when you're out doing your own thing, you can actually sort of get these gains. Like at a career, you might get a 3% raise, but you can kind of take this into your own control a little more. One thing I just wanted to go back to was the idea of you coming back and not going back to a regular career. For some people, that might actually work just fine. If they want to save up and work to take this time off and travel the world, it doesn't mean they can't come back and go into a career. Like you can leave a job, you can travel the world, and then you could go back and do a career. There's nothing wrong with that. But obviously it wasn't for you. But for some of that might work just fine.
Yeah, at the time that I quit my job, that's exactly what I thought I would do. In fact, as I was quitting my job, I had all of this anxiety around how am I going to explain this gap on my resume to my future employers? And so of the questions that were like dominating my mind, the worries that I had when I quit, that was very much at the forefront. How do I explain the gap?
Yeah.
And what I came to was two conclusions. Number one is if you can't live it down, play it up, right? I'm not going to try to hide that gap on my resume. I'm going to emphasize it. And, when I apply for jobs, I'm going to be like, look at this super cool thing that I did, right? Every other applicant has just done the traditional, they went to college, maybe they went to grad school, and now they're applying for your job. I flew on a one-way ticket to Egypt and learned how to stand in 110-degree heat and negotiate with a cab driver in a language that I don't even speak. So if you want me to do some negotiating on behalf of your company, well, guess what? I have been tested and I have done some stuff, right? Like that's the type of thing that, where travel can really be an asset. Like you show that you have initiative, that you are ambitious and unconventional, that you think outside the box, that you have a lot of exposure to different cultures, different languages, different types of people, that you're comfortable in a wide variety of situations. Like there's so many life skills that come out of traveling. And so my thought was, if I've got to apply for a job, like this trip that I took, this 2-year backpacking trip, this isn't I could go in thinking like, oh, this is a gap on my resume. I hope they don't notice. Or I could go in being like, you would be lucky to hire me because I did this. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been great motivation for anyone that's kind of considering this, whether they only want to take off 6 months and go back to their job, or if they want to do something more like you did and take longer time. and maybe never go back to a normal job. I think it's been very motivating, and I like how you've filled in that idea of how to deal with the resume, because I could see a lot of people wanting to do this and maybe still go back to a regular job. But can you let people know where they can find you online?
Yeah. So you can find me at affordanything.com, and I have a free ebook. It's called Escape, and it's all about escaping the 9 to 5. So you can download it for free at affordanything.com/escape. Also, if you enjoy podcasts, I have a podcast called Afford Anything. So just search for Afford Anything in your favorite podcast player.
Sounds perfect. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Paula for sharing her path to escaping the 9 to 5. You can find show notes for this episode at MapleMoney.com/Paula Pant. If you like this episode and haven't been listening since the beginning, I want you to go way back to one of the very first episodes where Pat Flynn discussed his journey after being laid off from his career as an architect. I think you'll love it. Paula Pant's Afford Anything podcast is great, and you should definitely check it out. Like many of the top personal finance podcasts, we both share the same editor, Steve Stewart, and he's my guest next week, but we're not talking about podcasts. He'll be on to talk about his belief that you don't need a credit card. While I'm very much for responsibly using credit card as a tool, Steve makes some great points, so check back next week.